Welcome to Engaging Life, the show where we learn about passions, well-being at work, and everything it takes to live a fulfilling and engaging life. I'm your host, Lexi Redmond, and I'm here with Rebecca Marie Joe.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about just her life, her experience as a content editor, and her experience at Relevant Magazine. And we're just going to have a really fun conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the controversy that happened with Relevant Magazine really quickly. It's a Christian magazine that targets millennials, I believe, and it's like the biggest, I think, content producer for Christian millennials. But they have a really interesting intersection in that they also have like celebrities that were on the in the magazine, and it's like, I'm trying to say, I think Andrew Garfield was on there, the Roots were on there, so they cater to a lot of different audiences.
Yes, they interview mainstream, secular celebrities and cover mainstream culture, while also covering, Christian life, faithfulness, soul care.
Cool.
So they have an interesting space in the culture because they monopolize, these conversations around both the secular and the spiritual.
That's really cool. How did you find out about that job? How did you get connected to them?
So I had known about Relevant since I was in high school, I guess. I didn't grow up in the church, but I found my way into a youth group around 15.
Wow.
And so I knew about them then, and when I had kind of finished up my job in New York City, my best friend was working for them as a office assistant, personal assistant to the CEO. So she knew that they were looking for a managing editor, and that had been my role up to that point. So she asked me if I'd consider, talking to them, and I was like, sure, of course, I'd love networking, I'll do that. And it just so happened that they offered me the position, and it was at a time when I was like, okay, I can move back to Florida and be near my family, and it seemed like the perfect job.
Yeah. And coming from New York, that's interesting too, because was it really that you wanted to be closer to your family that you moved from New York?
So I had been working in New York for 5 years. I began going to school there at Fordham University, and then I started working full time, and I had wrapped up some projects at Odyssey as an assistant managing editor there, and I came down to Florida for about a month to live with my best friend, and I was applying to jobs in LA, Denver, New York. I was kind of just like, okay, I'll go wherever, and I didn't imagine that Florida would be where I landed. But when I got offered this position, I really admired the work that Relevant had been doing up to that point. They have a glossy facade, and so I was very attracted to the work itself. And I wrote this in my blog post. I took like a $20,000 pay cut, and I was like, but I'll be close to my family, and I rationalized it. Pro tip, don't do that. And so I took the position, but I was looking and applying for about a month between my role in New York and between getting hired here in Florida, and all of my stuff was in storage in New York because I didn't imagine I'd end up here. I literally had one suitcase to hang out at my best friend's, and then quickly had to go to Target and get office clothes.
But that's sort of like, that's really brave of you and courageous to like go out and move. We actually, my family and I moved about 7 years ago, and it was a family unit, but I moved in the middle of my freshman year of high school, and so moves are just really, really big, especially when you're moving from like the Northeast down to Florida. It's a completely different just mindset, the Northeast down here.
Yeah.
And so that's really courageous of you to like move without really much of a plan, it seemed.
Yeah.
And then to find your way at Relevant. So working at Relevant, I know that you said that they had like sort of a glossy facade. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So while I was there, one of the cover stars was Martin Scorsese. Another one was Ira Glass. The magazine had a lot of interesting cover stories, feature stories. They have a pretty big podcast So all that to say that they were pretty influential, I would say, in the Christian community, especially among millennial Christians. And, I wrote about in my blog post that you referenced, I wrote about how when you walked into the relevant office, it presents exactly how you want it to. It's open floor plan, and it had a pool table in the front room and a studio in the back, and there was, a Spotify playlist, playing over the speakers. And it presents very cool, hip, young, and that made me very comfortable when I first arrived, because that was the kind of organization I had been used to in New York.
Yeah.
Where they had couches and everyone worked on their laptops, and it was very relaxed. And then shortly after I started, it became very clear that the environment itself was not as relaxed as it presented. It was not as, easygoing and irreverent as the magazine itself presented. And it was a lot more, I don't even want to say intense, because I'm used to intense, but it was just a lot more toxic.
Yeah. There's this concept called psychologically safe environments, and reading your blog post, I was like, that was not a psychologically safe environment, meaning that it's just like you said, it's toxic. It's not a really good work environment. I know that you said the CEO, Cameron Strang, I believe, that he had a lot of control over all things. There wasn't really an HR process, much of an HR process.
Yeah, there was no real HR department. So I'll set up how you and I got connected.
Yeah.
But so Lexi messaged me after reading the blog post that I wrote after reading Andre Henry's blog post. And Andre Henry is the managing editor who took over the managing editor position at Relevant after I was no longer in that role, and we'll get to that. But he had published a Medium post that said Black Christians deserve better than churches and companies like Relevant, and someone had sent it to me, and when I read it, my jaw dropped. I was in a Target parking lot. I really like Target, apparently. And I was just like, kind of sweating, kind of nervous. I was like, who is Andre? Like, who wrote this?
Yeah.
It could have been written by me, because he just talked about so many really toxic situations between him and the CEO, Cameron Strang, where his authority as a managing editor was subverted and challenged. And so I was really impressed by the fact that he had kind of gone public with this blog post, and I followed up by tweeting at him and saying, hey, it's not just you. I experienced the very same thing. And then the conjecture of both of our blog posts kind of lit up the internet, and a ton of other former Relevant employees from over 15 years of time came forward and said, hey, me too. I was also I also experienced a very unpsychologically safe environment. And yeah. And because I think I read your article first, and it was just, I'll tell you what just struck me, the words kind of just diving into it, is when you were talking about the fact that you were in a meeting, and there was this idea that was presented that a popular Black Christian rapper should be seen on the cover with a noose around his neck. And I remember reading that you said you were just like, I said in the meeting, like, as a person of color, this is like, I can tell you that this is not okay, that people won't be like shocked, or like, this is crazy. Yeah.
And so that's the part that really struck me. And as someone I shared with you before we just started this, is that I went to a private Christian college, kind of small Christian environment, similar to probably Relevant, where there's a lot of millennials, there's a certain atmosphere, and still as a person of color, you kind of feel, I'll speak for myself, but you feel on the outside, and that you should never really be a part of the in crowd. And so reading that, I was taken back to some times where I was just like, I have come into contact with people like this.
Yeah.
So how was it being in that moment?
And honestly, our situations aren't unique.
Yeah.
They're very real lived experiences for people of color across the world. But it breaks my heart that you experienced something similar. And, to be honest, in New York, I didn't really feel that, because it's New York City. Diversity is celebrated. I had incredible coworkers, and I was given a lot of leadership responsibilities, and I never felt tokenized in my environments in New York. But when I came to Relevant, I suddenly, totally felt tokenized, and I was just like, why am I being put in these situations as a double minority, as the only woman in leadership and the only person of color? I think, I think at the time that I was there were probably 14 staff members, and there were 2 people of color across the staff, something like that. It was myself and the copy editor. And when that conversation, that idea was brought up by Cameron Strang, the CEO, to say, it'll be shocking if we put, this black man in a noose in our magazine, and people will be like, whoa, what is this? What's this conversation about? And I had to be like, pump the brakes, trust me, it's going to be disturbing, and like that's not it. Whatever you're thinking, it's not going to go the way you think. And he doubled down, he pushed back, and he was really annoyed with me that I had even brought up the inconvenience of his idea not being a good one. And when we left that meeting, he was just like annoyed with me. Yeah,
and I think it became even more toxic when you said in your blog post, and you were just like, I think from like other things had happened, I think before that, but after that is when really it was just like not a good environment for you.
Yeah, I kind of so I don't really hesitate speaking my mind, and like I said, I've had really good bosses who have encouraged that and allowed me to build my strengths in that way. But with Cameron Strang, it was very clear that he wanted a yes man, and I was not going to say yes, and I wasn't a man. So like it just didn't work. And so our relationship started fragmenting very quickly. And all the while I was like, I'm working in this super toxic environment. A lot of different things had happened. Like I had mentioned, hey, let's do something for Women's History Month. And he had pushed back kind of like, well, what about the people that aren't interested in that? And Andre had a similar experience where he wanted to fill in the editorial calendar with content celebrating Black History Month, and Cameron had told him the same thing. So I was like, what, this guy's not original in his criticism.
And that was, with the content too, that was along with things that were already planned for planned for content. So that would be in addition to like what was already set out to be published.
Not a replacement.
Yeah, and so that's crazy. So that happened with you with Women's History Month. I didn't know that.
Yep.
Wow, so I know that you said in your blog post that like we've been talking about, that it got worse and then you took a vacation. Yeah. And that vacation kind of was able to clear your mind a little bit, and you realized that maybe you shouldn't continue at Relevant.
Yeah, so let me follow the timeline, but I was there from September until March, and around December, January, that's when I felt like, Cameron Strang had kind of had it with me. It was really bizarre. We had a situation happen where I wanted to write an article that I'd worked on under my byline, Rebecca Mary Jo. I use that because the internet's a weird place, and
very strange place.
Yeah, and it's my name. It's my first and middle name. And I wanted to remain consistent since I had already been publishing at other publications and at Relevant under that name. And he attached my last name, which is Flores, to the byline, and I kind of followed up with my boss, and I was like, hey, consistency matters to me, blah, 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 I'm going to take it off. And then it was put back on. It was like, oh, this is coming from Cameron himself. We can't do anything. And I was like, that's weird, you know? And consistency aside, I think it also felt like an issue to me in the sense that I was like, why is someone else telling me how I can, present myself in the world? This doesn't, I don't know, it just never sat right with me. So his door to the door to his office was open, and I notified him, hey, I'm taking my last name off again. I've been publishing under Rebecca Mary Jo, and I didn't think it would be a big deal. Yeah. It was literally like, I'm just clarifying this with you. Maybe you hadn't heard it from me before, but like this is kind of where we're at. And I thought again that it would be not a non-issue, and then would move on with publishing the magazine. And
it's not a big deal.
yeah. And I would think, we have more important discourses to address. Like there's a lot more going on in the world than
content, about what your actual job is.
Yeah, about content, about the current events happening in the world. And so I get back to my desk and I receive like a paragraph on Slack from him, like scathing, just saying like that I had come into the CEO's office uninvited, and that it was super inappropriate, and that I wasn't there to build my own name, and that basically that he was taking off my byline altogether. And so it just very clearly felt like, he's punishing me for this, and he insulted my writing in the same comment. And so it just, and I wrote in my blog post that at that moment I just lost it. I was like crying at my desk, but it was like tears of like anger, and also just kind of sick of putting up with,
tired of being sick and tired.
Yes, exactly, tired. And the next day I was almost fired on the spot when he, again addressed like how inappropriate it was that I had that reaction, and that I was there to build his brand, and his name's on the masthead, and if I don't like that, then there's the door. And I just remember kind of sitting in shock because, once again, the relevant facade is we're here to build God's kingdom, and, to inspire young millennials in the matters of faith, and and it just felt like this gross contrast between what I was putting my name on and the mission that we were promoting to churches and consumers and across the internet, and then sitting in front of this 40-year-old white man saying it's my name we're building, and and it just felt like, all right, this is, someone on the internet said relevant is Cameron's vanity project, and it's very accurate.
And it's sad because it is like sort of, you ask yourself the question is like, what type of Christianity is that? And it's a very like real distinction. I've questioned and said like, how can some of these people call themselves Christian? And I don't know him personally, obviously, but just in general, that type of environment, the type of environment that, I went to a private Christian school for like elementary school on through, I didn't do it in high school, but I did a private Christian school, obviously, when I went to university. And so coming into contact with some of these people and seeing that they are not as like forthright as they seem to be at first. And so I can imagine that was like pretty disturbing.
And at that time I didn't have the courage to leave yet, so I was just like, all right, I get it, I'll I was just like, all right,
play games.
I'll play ball. I'll do what you say. I kind of just like shut up and sit down, and kind of, I think at that point I had really been stuffing my energies and my giftings, and it just felt like very clearly he didn't want those parts of me that were original or would push back or would challenge him even. So it just felt like I was like just showing up to work, doing what I needed to do. And just really stuffing my voice. Like it felt like I was like, all right, your voice isn't welcome here, your voice doesn't matter here, so just forget it. And I went on vacation in March, and I was gone, I think 9 days, so I think it was like 7 altogether with the work week. And when I went on vacation, it was, like the lights turned on and I was relaxed and I was free, and I felt like, oh, this is what Rebecca feels like. Like this is what happiness feels like. And when I returned, I came back on a Wednesday and I showed up to work the very next day and was there. But when I had to return to the office, it just felt like I couldn't stuff my voice any longer. I couldn't play the game. And so I guess it was like, from January to March, it was 2-3 months of just feeling really disenchanted with the publication as a whole. And the reason Andre Henry's blog was so impactful to me was because, one, I read his blog 3 years after I left Relevant. Two, you know, it was really powerful for me to realize that I was not the only one that had such a toxic experience with Cameron straying. And three, for the week following that post that I published, I received essays in my inbox from other people that, you know, former assistants or former editors that said like, yeah, he threw a phone at my head once, or he, you know, and just kind of divulging all of these, you know, things that they had also kept stuffed inside. And I was just like, this isn't okay. Like, but I don't know, it's a matter of unchecked power and privilege, and it's a really sad situation because it's kind of ongoing.
I'm glad you mentioned that you got like this sort of outpouring of like, thank you for sharing your story. What was it like to get all of those stories? Because I know you mentioned that like you got them, but like what was the feeling of like, I know it was just like this, I'm not the only one it happened to, but was it sort of validation? You did say validation, but was it also just like thank you, or like lethargic, or you know what I mean?
Cathartic, you mean?
Cathartic.
No worries, but
I can't word.
I mean, at first, you know, I think it was really heavy, just because there was a lot of trauma in, you know, these messages that I received that I was upset that like people had gone through it to begin with, but then I think it just really made me fall in love with the medium of sharing your story, of writing again, because I was like, wow, this is how powerful our journeys are when we share them and when we bear witness to them. So to wrap up the Relevant saga, I came back from vacation for 3 days, and I was super depressed in the office, I'm sure, and just was kind of like not feeling it. And unbeknownst to me, someone that had started with me had just put in the resignation that week before I got back. So Sunday night, you know, I'm back Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's the weekend. Sunday night, I'm watching a show where in the show a writer is at a prestigious program at the University of Iowa, and it's just like not what she thinks it is. And she's kind of in the show dealing with her own disillusionment. And I just started like bawling. Like I was just like, this is me. This is what I'm feeling. Like, all right, God sees me and he knows that I'm really struggling to bring this home and to stay faithful to like all of these things that I think I'm supposed to build here, and all the people that trust me with their words in turn. And because I had great relationships with all my writers, and I really valued those relationships, and I just felt like God letting me know that it was okay to let go. And I don't know how I would have really worked that out following that night, because the next day I had called into work, just kind of said, you know, I told my boss that I needed the day to recover from jet lag, and truthfully I kind of needed the day to be like, what am I going to do with work, because I can't quit without another job, and I just was trying to figure a lot of these heavier things out. And by noon, and he emailed me back and said, no problem, take the day, like take care of yourself. And by noon, Cameron Strang had sent me a 500-word email firing me. And I was like, okay, there's my answer.
Wow.
So one part that I didn't include in my blog post is that my friend had invited me to join him and his friends in Cuba, and I'd been like, I don't have any more vacation. Wow. And the first thing I did was like, we're going to Cuba. When do we leave? So that was really great.
Yeah, and I don't want to like because that's a really hard situation, but that's really cool to hear that it was just that you were going through that and kind of questioning that, and you were like, nah, forget it, let's go to Cuba.
Yeah.
And so the story still shocks me because it's so prevalent, right? And like everybody has these sorts of stories where they like have trouble with their boss. Obviously, in the Christian bubble that sometimes we live in, just can be really hurtful because you don't expect that behavior to come from people that are so...
And there's a spiritual component.
Exactly. And you're just like, how can you do this? How can you act this way? And so the fact that you went through that and that you were able to use that and tell your story, which I think that's why I really wanted to interview you, is that you were able to tell your story on that blog post, and really, like you said, you and Andre both have this catalyst so that all of these people were like willing to share their story. And I don't want to like minimize that, because it's really, really big.
It was amazing, because, you know, what the fallout of that for Relevant was that, you know, there were so many people that came forward online, essentially saying, me too, you know, I went through this under Cameron Strang's leadership too, and the one factor being isolated over and over and over and over again in all of these individual stories was Cameron Strang. It wasn't like, oh yeah, everyone there is mean, or it's a really dog eat dog environment, because it's not. And my coworkers, I have great relationships with them to this day, or the people that I worked with. It was Cameron Strang. You know, he would come in some days really chill, ready to shoot the breeze and talk to you about the latest movies or whatever, and he seemed like the coolest guy, or a guy you'd grab a beer with or whatever. And then other days he would come in and you just felt like you wanted to stay out of his way, or he would skewer you and insult your work ethic, or insult your haircut, or it just felt like there were days when he really wanted to build his ego or comfort his own inner conflict by working it out on someone else, and that's not okay. That's never okay. Exactly. So a few of us collaborated to put out a formal statement, kind of reiterating that it's Cameron Strang who's the source of this toxicity and this abuse, and that it spanned 15 years of time. Yeah. And I think the last I saw it had 40 signatures from different people. So I'm really thankful we were able to take it that far, because I certainly didn't imagine that the internet would respond.
And he did step down. Well, he wasn't going to do it first. But he did step down, and hopefully to work on himself, and hopefully he works on himself.
Yeah, I am wary, but
I just saw there was like an Instagram post that was posted the other day where somebody was saying like, oh, he's taking the punches, and it was just like
he's turning the other cheek while taking the punches, and I was like, it's like those darn kids on the internet called me racist.
I know, and it's like,
don't be racist.
Exactly, and it's just take accountability for what you've done, and don't try to skirt the system. And when people who have privileges have them checked, then they get really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize like the fact that we all make mistakes,
Yeah, of course.
From the very onset of this, I've never wanted to appear haughty, or that I'm like, throwing stones at Cameron Strang, but it certainly feels like there is a way to be accountable and make restitution. There is a way to do that in the world, and there's a way to begin undoing the harm that you've done, but one, doesn't happen with a 3-month sabbatical. Yeah. 2, it doesn't happen while, there are different reports saying that, he's taking this less seriously privately than he is publicly. And 3, you gotta account to the people that
you have to do the work.
You have to do the work. Yeah, you have to do the work, and we'll see.
Yeah. Well, getting back to focusing on you, what are you doing right now in your career, now that whole season of your life is over? Thank goodness.
Yeah. So most recently, I've been working as a communications analyst and consultant, and I really have a great story about my boss, the communications lead. He, after day 3, I was really vocal in a meeting and was contributing ideas, and I had kind of been, burned, I guess, by like this situation at Relevant, and felt like, oh no, male bosses don't like it when you're like competent underneath them, under them or whatever. And I stepped aside with him privately, and I was like, listen, I know you're the lead. I'm here to like defer to your, your strategy, or kind of let him know, and he just kind of scoffed, and it was hilarious. And he was like, RJ, you could tell me I'm stupid, and I'd probably be like, maybe, and he was just like, no, I want your ideas. I want, like, what are you here to do other than like, of course, build and contribute. And it just really, being under his leadership,
Mm-hmm.
his name is Daniel, has just really empowered me
Yeah.
and healed a lot of junk from my experience at Relevant. And it's just like, he's shown me what a great manager is like.
Yeah, and like reaffirmed your creative ability since you felt
Yeah.
so stifled before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's been wonderful, and now, it sucks to have gone through that at Relevant, but I hope people hearing the story will be able to know when they're in that kind of situation. And the best thing to do is just like plan your exit, even if it's been 2 weeks or 2 months. If any job is starting to affect your mental health, or making you feel incompetent when you have been able to thrive in other environments, then
unfulfilled, like dispassionate.
Yeah.
Find another job.
Yeah,
Please find another job.
for sure.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking with me about your experience. Where can the people find you?
Good question.
Maybe mention your podcast.
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram as @RebeccaMurrayJo. But I also blog at amongtheolivetrees.com.
It's a great blog.
Thank you. And I was watching TikToks earlier, so maybe that's next. but thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
One final question I forgot to ask. I'm trying to remember to ask. It's a new podcast, guys. Bear with me. But how do you engage with life other than work? So work is like fulfilling to you. How else do you find fulfillment?
I love reading memoirs, particularly.
Oh.
I just finished Jonathan Van Ness's memoir, Over the Top. Wonderful story of someone's journey in the world and trying to like figure it out, as we all are.
Yeah.
I just picked up Rachel Held Evans' book, Inspired.
Oh my goodness.
Very excited to dive into her work since I never have before. So I think memoirs give me a lot of life. I like fiction as well, but I take longer getting through it because it doesn't feel as like, I like the grittiness of people's life.
That's awesome.
And hopefully working on a book proposal soon myself. That's the first time I've said it.
Please keep me up to date on this.
Yeah.
That's wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
and then
awesome.
My dog Raya keeps me busy, and planning a wedding.
Yeah.
So
congratulations.
Thank you. So just a couple things.
Yeah, just a couple. Well, like her life, I hope your life is ever engaging. Take care.